Good morning. My name is Frances Shannon. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and the Acting Vice-Chancellor at the moment. Stephen Parker is away and he has asked me to do this Week in Politics interview with Michelle Grattan this morning. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
It's been another interesting week in politics, what with the election over and the cabinet sworn in now. It's been somewhat of a controversial start for the new Abbott government. One of the issues that's been in the press certainly is the women in the new cabinet. Is it a bad look to have only one woman in Tony Abbott's new cabinet?
I think it is a bad look. He was somewhat constrained because, of course, Sophie Mirabella has lost her seat and she would have otherwise been in the cabinet, so she would have been there with Julie Bishop, who's in a very senior position as the incoming foreign minister and the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. But overall, there are only half a dozen women on the front bench. There are 4 in the outer ministry, 1 parliamentary secretary. I think that it was particularly bad to not promote more women to the parliamentary secretary level because Tony Abbott had a bit more flexibility there. At the higher reaches, he was somewhat locked in by the fact that he'd virtually guaranteed stability among his front bench, his cabinet and outer ministry level from their opposition days, but he could have done much more at the parliamentary secretary level. Also, I think the problem with this for him is that it feeds into the stereotype that he's not good on matters concerning women, which is a bit of an unfair stereotype, I might say, but nevertheless it reinforces that. And also, this is the sort of issue that does resonate out there in the community, even with people who don't take much interest in politics. They grab the headline of very few women and they think, oh yeah, that's what he's like.
What do you think the Liberal Party needs to do long term to ensure that there is a fair representation of women in their upper echelons? Some
of the critics have pointed to the fact that women are not getting through the pre-selection process in enough numbers. Sue Boyce, who's a moderate senator, has made this point, and I think that that does go to the fundamentals, that unless you have people coming up through the ranks, it becomes harder to choose a reasonable number of women, and so the party does need to look to that. It's very against quotas, which is fair enough, but it does need some positive encouragement to women of talent to come through. Perhaps one of the problems is that politics has got such a bad name these days that for many women who've got plenty of choices as to what they want to do in making a contribution in their careers and their public lives and so on, it might look a pretty unattractive route to take.
Yes, I read something in the paper this morning that it was somewhat of a gladiatorial sport and therefore wasn't attractive to women. Another point about the cabinet makeup then, Arthur Sinodinos, the expectation was that he would have received the finance portfolio. What happened there?
He was the former Chief of Staff to John Howard. He has come in recent years into the Senate. He's very highly regarded as an economic expert and someone who's been around the traps a long time, so knows a lot. Tony Abbott did make it clear to him at some stage he would like him in the finance job. Precisely what happened is a bit of a mystery. I don't think that the Abbott explanation that he just needs people to serve an apprenticeship is a very convincing one, because otherwise why would he have offered it in the first place? So people are saying that it was people around Tony Abbott who counselled against the fast tracking of Arthur Sinodinos, either ministers or now ministers or people in his office, his chief of staff. But we don't know the exact backstory, but I think it was a missed opportunity. There was room in the cabinet because the Abbott cabinet is 19 rather than the 20 that there were before, and he would have been, I think, a valuable addition.
Okay, let's talk about the public service for a moment then. Several senior public servants heads have rolled, and there's a lot of talk in the press about Abbott being tough on the public service.
There are two issues here. When there's media talk of being tough on the public service, it often refers to jobs in the public service, and the Coalition is committed to cutting many thousands of jobs. But what's happened this week has related to the secretaries, the heads of department. Abbott has not gone as far as John Howard did in 1996, when a third of the heads of the departments were gone in one fell swoop. In a couple of cases, it almost seemed a matter of mistaken identity. People were got rid of that in retrospect the Coalition thought maybe shouldn't have been got rid of. But what Tony Abbott has done is push out 3 departmental heads, and Martin Parkinson, who's the Secretary of Treasury, is to go from mid next year. Now, I think that Dr. Parkinson's a big loss. He'll probably get some job. The implication was perhaps an overseas post, but he is regarded as one of the most competent and well-regarded public servants, and to have him out of Treasury is, I think, not a good idea. In the other cases, there were instances of pretty clear retribution. Andrew Metcalf wasn't in immigration most recently, but had been in immigration and had been critical of Coalition policy when he was in that job. And there was another head who had been involved in the whole climate change architecture. Again, his moving on is directly related, I think, to his views and previous position. And this is really not a very good way to treat the public service. I think that we do need a public service which has been willing to be frank and fearless, and that sort of attitude is not encouraged when people are treated badly.
What about slimming down all the names of the portfolios? That seems to have generated an awful lot of comment in the media, probably more than it deserves.
I think that there are pluses and minuses here. Some of the titles were ridiculous. They had about 3 or 4 handles to them, and that was over the top. On the other hand, I think that Tony Abbott has got himself into more trouble than it was worth by leaving out titles like science and including titles like sport. So he really would have been better to be a bit more careful and have expanded a few titles, slimmed down overall.
Well, here in the ACT this week, legislation has been introduced for same-sex marriage. I'm wondering if that poses a problem for Tony Abbott and how the federal government will handle that.
It's a very interesting question, because Tony Abbott will be under a lot of pressure to intervene and override this legislation. Now, it is not as easy as it used to be, because under a change sponsored by Bob Brown a couple of years ago, now the federal government can't just strike down an ACT bill. It has to actually use Parliament to do so, get it through both houses. So that potentially is a problem when you have the Senate not in the government's control. How that would go in the Senate is not at all clear, because it's not clear whether Labor would treat this as an issue of same-sex marriage, which requires a conscience vote in the Labor Party, or an issue of territory power, which doesn't. And I think there'd be an internal argument over that. On the specific question of whether Tony Abbott does move, well, he'll be under conflicting pressure from his own ranks. Obviously, the Conservatives in those ranks will want him to do something, but other people will say this sends a bad signal at a couple of levels, on the whole gay marriage issue, but also on territory power, that a coalition government shouldn't be interfering in what the territory does. So he's taking advice at the moment. George Brandis, the Attorney General, is getting legal advice. We'll see what happens. Of course, the other route is a High Court challenge. The ACT government is confident that it its legislation would survive such a challenge, or at least hopeful, but you never know with the High Court.
When the Senate changes next year, would that change the response to such an issue?
It's really hard to know how the Senate would behave on a matter like this. In fact, it's hard to know how the Senate will behave on any matter because we don't even finally know the composition of all those crossbenchers, but they'll be a rather unpredictable and potentially lively lot, I'd say.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. I guess we will wait and see how the new government behaves in the next few weeks. Thank you.